They wore crowns, yet ruled with hands drenched in blood. One queen poisoned her own people, another burned believers alive. How often envisioned as the world's civilizers become its most feared conquerors? These stories will shock you to your core. First, Mary of England, infamously known as Bloody Mary. You've probably whispered her name like a curse, heard tales of a queen who incinerated her subjects. But the true history of Mary Tudor is even darker than the legend suggests. She wasn't born a monster. Mary was a woman thrust into chaotic times, the daughter of Henry VIII and Catherine of Aragon. When she finally inherited the crown, she believed she would restore England's very soul. Instead, she drowned it in fire. When Mary ascended the throne in 1553, England was deeply divided. Her father had fractured ties with the Catholic Church. Her brother, Edward VI, had pushed Protestant reforms. Mary, a devout Catholic, saw herself as God's instrument, sent to guide England back to what she believed was truth. For her, faith wasn't mere politics. It was a war, and she would win it at any cost. Her first act was to revive the Heresy Acts, ancient laws that made rejecting Catholic doctrine a capital crime. In plain terms, if you were Protestant, you were a traitor. Between 1555 and 1558, approximately 280 men and women were burned at the stake for refusing to abandon their faith. Some were priests, others tailors, bakers, or even teenagers. Her victims weren't soldiers, they were neighbors. And these executions weren't hidden away. They were public spectacles designed to spread terror. Imagine a town square in the 1550s, damp cobblestones, smoke already rising as a crowd gathers. Parents clutch their children tightly. Vendors peddle bread. Soldiers drive stakes into the ground. Then, the condemned are dragged out, bound to the posts, and wood is stacked around their feet. As the flames ignite, the crowd gasps, the smoke thickens, and the acrid smell of burning flesh fills the air. Mary didn't just punish heresy, she transformed faith into a horror. Terrifying theater. One of her most famous victims was Thomas Cranmer, the Archbishop of Canterbury, the very man who had signed his recantation into the flames, declaring, "This hand has sinned." Then there was Lady Jane Grey, the 9-Day Queen. She was only 16 years old when her family used her to block Mary's claim. Claim to the throne. Mary could have shown mercy. Instead, she signed Jane's death warrant. The young girl was Smithfield, Oxford, and Lewes became symbols of terror. In one harrowing instance, 10 people in Sussex were burned together on a single pyre. Imagine the screams echoing across the marketplace, all in the name of divine order. Mary believed she was saving souls, but in reality, she twisted faith into fear. Her reign lasted only 5 years, yet the memory of her bonfires burned for centuries. Even her own subjects whispered that hell itself had come to England, wearing a crown. On another continent, a different queen was rising, one who wouldn't just burn her enemies in the marketplace, she would erase them from the map. Catherine II of Russia, Catherine the Great. Do you know why history books love to call her the Great? Elegant, enlightened, a patron of the arts, the queen who modernized Russia. Sounds impressive, doesn't it? But peel back the portraits and palaces, and her empire wasn't built on brilliance alone. It was forged from fear, fire, and absolute control, and millions paid the price. Let's begin with one of the bloodiest stories of her reign, the Pugachev Rebellion. This peasant uprising began in 1773, a movement so massive it spread across the entire Volga region. Over 200,000 people, peasants, Cossacks, disgruntled serfs, rose against the empire following Yemelyan Pugachev, who claimed to be Catherine's deceased husband, Tsar Peter III, miraculously alive and ready to free them. They sought land, food, and dignity. What they received was a massacre. Catherine left the war to her generals, who scorched their way through the countryside. By 1775, 1762, and 1769, over 50 smaller uprisings erupted, each quelled with overwhelming military force. The empire's message was clear: challenge the crown, and death awaited. Catherine spoke of enlightenment, but under her, serfdom worsened. She empowered nobles, binding families to land as property. By the late 18th century, over half of Russia's population, approximately 10 million people, were legally serfs, living in conditions akin to slavery. They were beaten, sold, or separated from families at will. While peasants toiled and starved, Catherine's St. Petersburg court glittered with champagne and silks. Then came mass expulsions. In Muibet, 17 by Tet, she ordered 40,000 Armenians, Greeks, and Bulgarians forcibly removed from Crimea, marched hundreds of kilometers inland to the Azov region. Families, livestock, and villages vanished. It was population manipulation. People moved like chess pieces to secure the empire. And in Muibet 1791, she created the Pale of Settlement, forcing Jewish communities into specific Western territories. Millions of Jews became second-class citizens, denied access to cities, property, and professions. It was an early example of state-sponsored ethnic restrictions in Europe, a policy that echoed for centuries. And while Russia still smoldered under Catherine's rule, another queen in Europe prepared to wage her own wars, using laws, armies, and a quiet cruelty disguised as order: Maria Theresa of Austria, the Empress. People often remember Maria Theresa as the mother of modern Austria, the strong empress who ruled an empire, raised 16 children, and modernized her realm. Sounds admirable, doesn't it? But behind the portraits and powdered wigs hid a ruler whose power often came at a brutal cost. Her reign wasn't just about reform and progress, it was about control, suppression, and suffering on a national scale. She ascended the throne in 1740, and almost immediately, Europe descended upon her. The War of the Austrian Succession from 1740 to 1748 tore her empire apart. Her armies fought in Silesia, Bohemia, Italy, everywhere at once. To fund it, she relentlessly taxed her people. Peasants were forced to surrender their harvests, their livestock, and even their tools. In some regions, grain shortages led to famine, and reports of hundreds dying of starvation emerged from villages. This wasn't accidental. Economists later termed this structural violence, where the government's own policies become a weapon. During the fighting, her troops were ruthless against rebellion and disloyalty. If a village was suspected of aiding Prussian forces, it could be erased from the map. Her generals had orders to confiscate property, take hostages, and burn unreliable towns.
In parts of Bohemia and Silesia, civilians were forced to quarter soldiers, feeding and clothing them, sleeping outdoors while troops occupied their homes. And those who resisted risked not just their property, but their lives. Even after the war, the punishments continued. Maria Teresa ordered mass resettlements of people she deemed undesirable. In the 1750s and 60s, she deported poor beggars and Roma families from Vienna to remote borderlands. Thousands died of starvation or disease before reaching their destinations.
Then came the 7 Years' War, from 156 to 160. Another round of chaos. Austria lost thousands of soldiers, but civilians paid an even higher price. She expelled thousands of Protestants from Austria, sending them on forced marches to Prussia. When she died in 1780, the Habsburg Empire had grown stronger, but its population was exhausted. Villages had been burned, thousands displaced, and countless families destroyed by famine and taxes. While Maria Theresa wielded the sword of law to break her enemies, the next queen would use something far sharper: faith itself. Isabella I of Castile, Isabella the Catholic. Isabella is mostly remembered as the queen who discovered the New World, the one who financed Columbus and helped unify Spain. Yet, behind that shining image lurked a ruler who turned faith into a weapon and her kingdom into a machine of persecution. Her idea of unity came at the cost of thousands of human lives and the destruction of entire cultures. Let's begin in 1492, the same year Columbus sailed west. That year, Isabella and her husband Ferdinand issued the Alhambra Edict, ordering all Jews in Spain to convert to Christianity or leave the country. Around 200,000 people were forced to abandon everything they owned. Families who had lived in Spain for centuries became enemies overnight. They had only 4 months to sell their homes and businesses. It was state-sanctioned robbery disguised as a matter of faith. Those who refused to convert were forced to leave by sea or foot. Contemporary accounts describe Jewish families marching in the summer heat, carrying sick children and elderly, dying of hunger or disease before even reaching the ports. The crown seized their abandoned wealth, calling it God's justice. Then came the Spanish Inquisition, one of the darkest institutions in European history, and Isabella's personal project. Established in 1478, it was meant to root out heresy, but in reality, it targeted anyone who didn't fit the new Catholic order. Secret tribunals tortured confessions out of suspects accused of Judaism or Islamic sympathies. People were whipped, stretched on racks, or burned alive in public ceremonies. Historians estimate that during her lifetime, at least 2,000 people were executed by order of the Inquisition, and tens of thousands more were imprisoned, stripped of their property, or permanently exiled. Isabella's wars at home were equally ruthless. During the Granada campaign, the final push to expel Muslims from Spain, her armies besieged cities, burned crops, and massacred civilians. The surrender terms for Granada promised tolerance, but within a decade, these promises were shattered. Mosques were confiscated, Korans destroyed, and forced conversions began. By 1502, all Muslims in Castile were compelled to convert or leave the country, mirroring the expulsion of the Jews. Her policies profoundly shaped the land for centuries, far beyond Spain itself. She authorized the first colonial charters upon Columbus's return, setting the stage for forced labor and exploitation in the Americas. The encomienda system, where indigenous populations were entrusted to Spanish settlers for conversion and labor, quickly devolved into legalized slavery. For Isabella, faith and power were one and the same. Her reign unified Spain, yes, but through fire, exile, and fear. Under her rule, entire peoples were driven from the land that had been theirs for generations. And while Isabella claimed to act in God's name, far from Europe, another queen ruled as a goddess herself, revered, feared, and merciless to all who defied her. Ranavalona I of Madagascar, the Mad Queen. If you thought the previous queens were ruthless, wait until you hear about Ranavalona I, often called the Mad Queen of Madagascar. Her reign makes almost every other monarch on this list seem merciful. She didn't just rule a kingdom, she ruled through terror, superstition, and absolute control. Between 1828 and 1861, she transformed Madagascar into a land of fear, isolation, and death. When she took power after her husband's death, Madagascar had approximately 5 million inhabitants. By the time she died, there were only 2 to 2.5 million. Historians still debate the exact figures, but almost half the population vanished, not through foreign invasion, but through her own policies. One of her worst instruments of control was forced labor. All men, women, but even teenagers were conscripted into service for the crown. They had to build roads, palaces, and fortresses, dragging heavy stones through the jungle heat without food or pay. Thousands died annually on these projects. Some roads built under Ranavalona were famously called bone roads. Then there was her obsession with rooting out traitors and foreign corruption. She introduced one of history's most horrific practices, the Tangana ordeal. Anyone accused of witchcraft, treason, theft, or even misfortune could be forced to drink a poisonous concoction made from the Tangana nut. The accused had to vomit 3 chicken skins to prove their innocence. If they failed, they died in agony. Records suggest approximately 3,000 people were executed this way each year. While elites sometimes got a dog or chicken tested first, for common folk, there was no mercy. Ranavalona's rule didn't just kill through poison, it annihilated through spectacle. She turned executions into public lessons. People were hung over cliffs, left dangling for days until the ropes broke. Others were boiled alive or buried up to their necks until they suffocated. She even had the severed heads of French soldiers impaled on stakes along the beaches as a warning to invaders. She feared all things foreign, especially Christianity. Missionaries arriving from Great Britain and France to convert the Malagasy soon became her enemies. In the 1830s, she banned Christian worship completely. Possession of a Bible could lead to imprisonment or execution. One missionary report describes 15 Malagasy Christians hung over a ravine, their pillars slowly cut until they fell one by one because they refused to renounce their faith. And yet, in a strange twist of fate, she kept her throne for 33 years. No foreign army overthrew her, no rebellion lasted long. Her rule blended isolationism, brutality, and nationalism, a regime that defied Europe while internally destroying its own people. When Ranavalona died in 1861, the island was half empty, its economy ruined, and its population too terrified to even speak her name. She left no empire, no legacy of glory, only scars.
These were they, the most terrifying female rulers and their most shocking crimes. Each queen but testament to how power, unchecked, can corrupt even the most regal of souls. From the burning pyres of England to the forced marches of Austria and the poisoned jungles of Madagascar, their stories remind us that the past is not always what it seems.
Understanding these histories offers a crucial lesson for our present and future. Power, when concentrated and unchallenged, can lead to atrocities regardless of gender or era. It's a sobering reminder to remain vigilant, to question authority, and to advocate for justice and human dignity. For it is only by learning from the darkest chapters of our past that we can hope to build a more just and compassionate world.